Well, our task this week is to read Leviticus. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's not an easy task. So I hope that you'll spend a few minutes with me here before we read the text in preparation for that reading. Maybe I'll be able to say something that will be helpful to you as you do the reading this week. And so let's talk just a little bit about the book of Leviticus. Welcome. My name is Andrew Dow, and the church here in Conroe has had the goal this year in 2026 to read the Bible twice. Now, whether you've been able to keep up with us to this point or not, I don't care. I'm glad you're here, and I want to encourage you to be reading the Bible. We believe that reading the Bible is absolutely crucial if we're going to be disciples of Christ. And that includes reading books of the Bible that are challenging to us. It includes reading books of the Bible that may even be boring to us. And maybe Leviticus fits that bill. There's a reason that God preserved these words for us. Our task is to read them, to meditate on them, to study them, and to consider what they teach us about our God. So Mike and I are putting out these videos as a way to help encourage you, to remind you, and to help you be better readers of God's Word. And we hope that we're accomplishing that. And so we want to invite you to join with us as we're reading the Bible. Pick up right where we are and start reading the Bible with us. Let's talk just a little bit about Leviticus. First, I want to say a few things about the place of Leviticus in the Bible, putting it where it goes in the Scriptures. Leviticus is the third book of the Old Testament. That places it in a collection of books called the Books of Law, or as the Hebrews would call it, the Torah. These first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, these first 5 books serve as the basis of Israel's relationship with Yahweh, their God. It tells about where this relationship began and what the demands of this relationship are. Now, when we come to the book of Leviticus, it's going to be helpful for us to try to place it in the story of the Bible. In terms of the Bible story, Leviticus takes place entirely at the foot of Mount Sinai. In fact, the book ends with a sort of summary statement. Just in case we've forgotten where we're at in the story of the Bible, the book ends with this phrase. It's the very last sentence in the book of Leviticus. These are the commandments which Yahweh commanded Moses for the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. That's Leviticus 27:34. So put yourselves in the Israelites' shoes here for a minute. They've left Egypt behind, and they've gotten as far as Mount Sinai, but they're in the middle of the wilderness. They've done a couple of things. They've built a tabernacle, and they've built all the furniture that goes in it. They've ordained their priests from among the Levites, and they've received some very basic instructions about what their lives are supposed to look like now. What does it look like to live in a covenant with Yahweh? The 10 Commandments, those sort of basic instructions. And now, as they sit at the base of this huge mountain, with all of the fire and all of the smoke around it, the presence of God, over the span of a year, they receive these detailed instructions that we read here in the book of Leviticus. It's kind of an odd name for a book when you stop and think about it. And this book does have that as its name. We call it Leviticus, but I want to say just something about the name of this book for a minute. The Jewish people typically called their books whatever the first word of the book was. So, for instance, Genesis was known as in the beginning because the book begins with that phrase. And so whenever they opened up the scroll of Genesis, they would have recognized that they're reading about what took place in the beginning. And that's true of Leviticus as well. The book that we call Leviticus was first called by the Jews Vayikdol. That was the Hebrew term. After all, this is the first word of the book in Hebrew. This is a Hebrew word which means, then he called. I think that's fascinating because every time a Jew would have referred to this document, or every time a rabbi would have read from this scroll, there would have been a constant reminder that these are the words that Yahweh called out. These are the words that God declared to his people. Now, we end up calling the book a different name. We end up calling it Leviticus based on the way that it was named by the Greek speakers who translated the book into Greek years later. They called this book Leviticus because its teachings related to the Leviticus, to the people of Levi, the Levites. These Levites would have offered the sacrifices. They would have handled the cleansing rituals that we're going to read about in this book. They would have been tasked with teaching the people of Israel the instructions that we found in this book. So that's a natural name to use for it as well. But at the end of the day, we have to get into the book and start reading it. What are we going to find when we open up the book of Leviticus? What are we going to read in this book? The book of Leviticus is all about God's expectations for the Israelites within the covenant that they made with one another. So this book is going to contain a lot of laws. It's going to be hard reading, and some people may think it's coma-inducing. But in a very real sense, this is a list of expectations. In a very real sense, this is a list of rules that the Israelites were expected to follow if they were going to be in a relationship with God. However, it might be helpful for you to realize that there are large sections of this book where common themes present themselves, where rules and laws are sort of collected together. It's not a random collection of rules. It's not a random smattering of laws. They are organized, and it'll be helpful, I think, to see some of that. So, for instance, in chapters 1 through 9, we're going to start to read this book, and the very first thing we're going to find is a list of all kinds of sacrifices that the Israelites are going to be offering in their new tabernacle. These sacrifices had different purposes, they took on different forms, but this opening of the book, it's the building blocks of the kinds of sacrifices that they're going to offer. In fact, the book of Leviticus is constantly going to point back to these chapters in a way. There's going to be all kinds of reasons to offer these sacrifices. So the book will say, when such and such situation occurs, you'll need to offer this kind of sacrifice. And we'll know what those sacrifices are from the very beginning of the book of Leviticus. It's going to list out those 5 sacrifices. Chapters 11 through 15 is going to describe laws that ensure that the Israelites remain ritually clean. These laws aren't really about physical filth. It's not about making sure your body's clean. It's not even really about spiritual filth. It's not about sin. It's about recognizing the lengths to which one should go to dwell among God's people. So things like dietary restrictions, rules around birth, how we handle rashes on the body, things like that. God's going to prescribe how those things are to be handled. Not because of morality or because of ethics necessarily, but to impress upon Israel how perfectly pure the God that they're serving is. Chapters 17 through 24 is going to be another collection of laws. And those chapters are going to contain a whole host of various laws that were designed to make Israel holy. That is, how is Israel going to relate to the nations around them? Well, God expects them to be set apart. He expects them to be different than the nations around them. And so there's going to be rules about avoiding sexual sins, sexual perversions. And those rules, if they followed them, would make them look very unusual to the world around them. God's going to set up a whole calendar for Israel made up of these feast days. And it's going to make Israel live in a completely different timeline than the rest of the world. Another collection of rules and instructions is going to be in chapters 25 through 27, which really wraps up the book by explaining some of the great blessings that are associated with obeying these laws and some of the catastrophic curses that will come if the Israelites ignore these laws. Now, one of the interesting things about Leviticus is that throughout the book, there are going to be a few important places where the laws are put on hold. Not very often, but in a few sections of the book, there's going to be places where the laws are not being described, but something different is being described. The first of those places that you need to keep an eye out for is in Leviticus chapter 10. Leviticus chapter 10 is one of only 2 stories told in this book, and it's the one about Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, these first priests of Yahweh, who are put to death because they disregarded Yahweh's laws. The second story is going to be told in Leviticus 24. And this also, when you get there, you'll find this also is a story of someone's failure to honor God's law and their death, which followed. However, in the middle of this book, Leviticus chapter 16, there is a description of an annual event which all of Israel is supposed to take part in, the Day of Atonement. And if I could suggest to you, I think that this is probably the central focus of the book. These laws are challenging to follow. These laws are hard. But God is merciful. Even in the Old Testament, even in the book of Leviticus, God makes a way to atone for the sins of his people. And that's what the whole Day of Atonement is about in Leviticus chapter 16. Let me leave you with just a few key takeaways from this book that I hope will be helpful for you as you read the book of Leviticus this week. First, this book teaches Israel, and in turn it teaches us as well, something about who God is. Namely, that God is pure and that God is holy. This is what it takes if you want to live in God's presence, because God is that holy. Second, the book of Leviticus teaches Israel and us that if we want to live in a relationship with God, that we must be pure and holy like God. In fact, that phrase is going to appear in the book. You shall be holy because I, your God, am holy. Finally, this book helps us see the challenge of living holy lives. This book reminds us that we need God's mercy and grace. This book reminds us that we need atonement for our sins. I want to encourage you not to be scared of this book. I know it can be daunting to step into all these laws. I know it can be a sort of a drudgery to get through them. But don't be scared of this book. Don't fret jumping into this book. If you've already read it this year, maybe that'll be helpful to you. It's challenging, but it's very, very valuable for us. Happy reading, everybody.